All right, I think we're gonna get started here. Thanks everybody, Koinaini Masicho, for joining us in this afternoon. We've got the complex open, we've got students in a school, a range of people here, so thank you so much. This is, our last virtual presentation of this event. And I'm gonna pass it over to the person who is leading it. A lot of people heard me talk this week, so I'm so excited that Tantra is here to join us. They spoke last week, and I think the topic really resonates with the Project Creates and the local to global project and focus areas and the themes that all came up from those beautiful youth-made videos. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it over. Make you host.
Awesome, Masicho. I'm just gonna need a sec here while I get my screen share up and going. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. Oh, sorry, just a sec. Two seconds. Can everyone hear me okay? And can everyone see my screen okay? Okay, I'm going to assume that's a yes. If you can't, just let me know. So Itlanatea, Sitsi Tanshai Suye, Wabumigwanokwe. How are you, everyone? My given name is Tanshai Redvers, and I am Dene and Métis from Treaty 8 territory in the Northwest Territories. But I'm currently living and residing here in Toronto, otherwise known as Toronto, Ontario, which is the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And before I get started, I just want to preface with I have two screens. So if it ever looks like I'm like gazing off into the corner of my screen, I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking at my slideshow, which is up here, and my camera's down here. So don't mind my shifting eye lines. But I'm so excited to be here with you all today and to chat about Indigenous youth suicide prevention versus life promotion, which can be a little bit of a heavy topic because suicide is something that's very real in our communities. It's something that's very real as a young person and something that's very real as adult supports who are working to support Indigenous young folks in our communities. So I will be talking about suicide for the duration of this talk. And if at any point you need to step out, take a moment, take some space, definitely do that. And know that Alyssa is here sitting in on this presentation and will be able to direct you to any supports if you need it before and after. And with that, I would love to share with you a little bit more about who I am. So as I mentioned, my given name is Tanshai Redvers. I was lucky and blessed to be gifted with a Dene Susane name at birth. And I have grown into that name. I used to hate having a Dene name, and now I absolutely am so grateful that I have and hold a Dene name, Tanshai, meaning flower. In my teachings, in my culture, in what my mentors and elders have shared with me is that before sharing any knowledge or information or any perspectives that I carry, it's so important to share about who I am, where I come from, and what I do, because we all have our different experiences that make up who we are and how we see the world. And so I'd love to share a little bit first about who I am and why I am here talking with you today. So I am an advocate. I identify as a social justice warrior, someone who's constantly fighting for change. I am also a writer and a published poet. I have a book called Fireweed that's out in the world. I am a multidisciplinary performer and actor. I am a creator. I am an auntie to two beautiful nieces. I'm a sister to 3 awesome siblings. I am a daughter. And I also identify as a Two-Spirit and queer woman. I grew up in the Northwest Territories, and I moved to Ontario, where I'm currently located, when I was 18 years old. And I moved away for school, where I studied international development studies and community development. And then I went on to get my Master of Indigenous Social Work. So I come carrying this social work background. I'm also the co-founder of We Matter, which is a national Indigenous youth-led organization dedicated to Indigenous youth hope and life promotion. We Matter started as a multimedia campaign meant to share messages of hope and love and support with Indigenous young people. And I'll be talking a little bit more about We Matter later. As mentioned, I am also Dene Sufene and Métis, and I come from a long line of Dene ancestors in the subarctic. My grandmother and mother went to residential school, making me an intergenerational residential school survivor, which makes up a big part of who I am and what my experiences have been. As mentioned, I did grow up in the North for the first 18 years of my life. I grew up in the town of Hay River on the Alberta and NWT border, and I spent some time in Fort Resolution, which is the First Nation that my mother is from. So I spent time kind of going back and forth between Hay River and Fort Res. And then I spent my high school years in Yellowknife in the big city. My mom was the only one of 8 siblings to graduate high school, and then down the road to go on to university. So my mom worked hard to give me a life of opportunities, a life where she was able to give me things that she didn't have growing up, due to growing up poor and growing up in Fort Res and growing up as a intergenerational residential school survivor herself. And so although my mom worked very hard to overcome a lot of the things that she went through and to give me opportunities like sports and school and education, it wasn't always easy. It wasn't always easy growing up in the communities I grew up on, and it wasn't always easy growing up in the family that I grew up in. The truth is, I was molded into chaos, yet told to walk a straight line. Meaning, I experienced lots of bullying and lots of lateral violence when I was growing up from people in my school, people in my classroom, and this really ate away at who I was. I also experienced a lot of unhealthy and abusive relationships at a very young age. I struggled with really severe self-esteem issues and self-worth issues. I didn't believe that I had a lot of self-worth. I saw myself in a pretty negative light. And I often had a pretty unstable family environment. It didn't always feel comfortable or safe living at home. And I had an unhealthy relationship with alcohol that lasted much of my high school years and even into my university years. I was exposed to lots of addiction and dysfunction in my extended family. And I lost a lot of cousins far, far too early due to drugs and alcohol. And I struggled with depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation for much of my young life, much of my youthhood. And when I was 15, I was hurting so much from all of this stuff that I actually tried to take my own life. Your pain lives inside of me. Your sadness, your anger have nestled a home made comfort. My soul aches, faltering like a failing engine. I ride on, only stopping when I'm forced to, not knowing how to get going again. I wait for your trauma to leave me, to unsettle itself, to say goodbye and never look back. But it doesn't, it won't, It was passed down and it will be passed down again. Patches don't hold engines together. Intergenerational trauma. The reality was I felt like I was being weighed down by all of these things I was experiencing and witnessing in the communities I grew up in. And now when I was 18 years old, I did everything I could to make sure I could leave the North and go as far away as possible because I wanted out. And I worked hard to make that happen. I did well in school. I saved money so that I could move as far away as possible because I just needed to get out of the North at that point in my life. And for myself, I needed to get out of this environment and reality that I had a hard time seeing beyond. Because sometimes when you're Indigenous and you grow up in small, isolated areas, especially in the North, it can sometimes feel like you live in a little bubble. And it's hard to know all of the things that's out there in the world beyond this small little place that you grew up in. And it was in moving away and having space to grow my perspective and learn about the world that I began to fully embrace who I was as a person. I began this healing journey, which led me to a work that I ended up doing for many years and that I currently still am doing with Indigenous youth. And that led me to the work that I have done with We Matter. As mentioned, We Matter is a national organization and multimedia campaign that creates messages of support for Indigenous young people who may be going through a hard time or struggling. And so my brother and I started this campaign with nothing, no money, nothing. We just felt like we could make a difference. And We Matter grew into this massive national organization where we now employ tons of other Indigenous young people to start dialogue and conversations around mental health and life promotion in Indigenous communities across Canada and beyond. Now, in unpacking my own story and beginning my own healing journey in working with We Matter for many years and in connecting with Indigenous youth and communities that I came in working and connecting with thousands of Indigenous youth and many Indigenous communities, I came to identify common threads or themes of experience around what it meant to grow up Indigenous. And what I mean by this is once I started that healing journey and was able to grow my perspective of the world, and in doing this work with Indigenous youth, I began to realize that there were 4 common things that I experienced, but I also came to realize that a lot of other Indigenous young people experienced. And these 4 common experiences that I came to understand are, the first one, feeling alone. Growing up Indigenous and in the North, I felt completely alone in my experiences and the things that I was going through and the things that I was seeing other people go through. I felt alone in my feelings because I carried a lot of really difficult feelings, from sadness to anger to confusion to shame to doubt. And I felt all alone. I felt like I was the only person feeling all of these things and going through the things I was going through. And I felt all alone in my struggles with mental health, in my struggles with depression and anxiety and suicidal ideation. And I realized that so many other people also feel alone in their experiences. The second thing that I came to understand is that support, and especially cultural support, was not accessible to me growing up and was not accessible to a lot of other Indigenous young people growing up. You see, even though I spent time on the land, I spent time hunting and gathering with my family, I spent time at a little family cabin that we had growing up. And even then, I still felt this sense of disconnection from my culture and from my purpose, a disconnection from my Indigenous identity. I didn't really know what it meant to be Indigenous. Because even though I was in some ways living this lifestyle on the land, hunting and gathering with my family, there weren't a lot of traditional teachings or Dene teachings that accompanied this lifestyle that we lived. So I didn't carry a lot of Dene or traditional knowledge, which meant that I had a hard time connecting to what it meant to be Dene, what it meant to be Indigenous. The third thing that I noticed in traveling to other Indigenous communities is that there was such a lack of visible Indigenous representation. For myself growing up, there was such an incredible lack of visible Indigenous representation and positive role models. I didn't see Indigenous people going on to be successful, going on to do really cool things. When I watched movies or watched TV or read magazines, I had a hard time seeing people who looked like me or seeing people who had been through the same things that I had been through. And even when I did see representation of Indigenous people in media, in public, it was often really negative. It was often rooted in things like addiction and trauma and violence and poverty. And so I had this really kind of jaded or negative vision or view of what it meant to be Indigenous. The fourth thing that I noticed that I experienced growing up and that I realized that so many other Indigenous young folks experience is this lack of trust of the people around me. Because of my experiences being bullied and experiencing lateral violence, I felt like I couldn't trust my peers. I felt like I couldn't trust friends or my parents or teachers. My family also didn't talk about, the things that we went through. We didn't talk about our feelings because my family didn't know how to talk about our feelings. And that meant that I felt like I couldn't talk about the things that I was going through. I felt like it was maybe wrong to talk about the things that I was going through. And sometimes it felt like I didn't trust the adults around me to make me feel seen and heard. Sometimes it felt like, adults were talking down at me as a young person. And so it made me not really feel like I wanted to reach out to the people that I was growing up with. And there was also this sense of shame. I felt like maybe if I talked about the things that I was going through, that people would make me feel ashamed or feel bad for the things that I was going through, the things that I was experiencing. And this is the idea that I had in my head. And so I just locked everything up. I also, I didn't have grandparents growing up. My grandparents passed away before I was born. And so there were so few opportunities and spaces in the communities I grew up in to connect with elders or connect with teachers. And really, I didn't have a full sense of the supports that were available to me. So these were themes that I realized I had experienced in my life growing up. And through doing this work with so many other Indigenous young people and communities, I realized that so many other thousands of Indigenous youth were also experiencing these exact same things. And eventually, I wanted to find a way to make sense of this. I wanted to find a way to make sense of this world that I and so many other Indigenous young people came to know. And it really came from learning about and understanding the intentional and strategic process of colonization and the effects of intergenerational trauma that everything really began to make sense. The metaphor, I developed this metaphor to understand the history of colonization and the present reality of colonization that still exists, that Indigenous young people still experience. And so I came up with this graph or this visual to help myself and to help other people understand the effect that colonization had on Indigenous young people and Indigenous mental health. So if you see on the screen, there's a little graph. And this metaphor that I developed to understand is that of a house. So if you imagine, I'm still an Indigenous young person, so imagine that I'm right? I'm an Indigenous young person, but imagine that I am Indigenous young person living or standing inside of a house. The structure of that house, so the frame of the house, the frame of the building, and the roof of this house is the structure. It's what makes the house stand up. And if you imagine that structure being oppression and colonization, what I mean by this is that there were things that our ancestors and our grandparents and our parents went through, like residential schools, racism, the taking of Indigenous lands, the movement of Indigenous people from their traditional lands, their traditional camps, into communities or onto reserves, and things like the Indian Act, which is a piece of legislation that actually governs the day-to-day reality of status Indians or Indigenous people. So if you imagine this house that I'm standing inside is built of this structure of colonization. What happens when a structure is made up of and built from colonization and oppression? What happens is inside the house, you tend to get a lot of things. So imagine in this house that I'm living in, there's furniture, there are appliances like lamps and a television set and couches. Now imagine these everyday household items being a loss of culture and language, lateral violence, mental health, stereotypes, trauma, abuse, bullying, isolation, and a lack of representation. As an Indigenous young person living inside of this house, I'm constantly surrounded by all of these things every single day. And what happens when I'm surrounded by these things every single day, it begins to get difficult to realize or understand that there's actually a different reality, because this is all that I know. This is my normal. This is what's normal to me. And what happens when this is the normal is that as an Indigenous young person, I also lack some coping skills because we aren't often taught how to deal with difficult emotions or how to talk about difficult things in school or in our home. We're not really taught how to cope in a healthy way. We also don't have a lot of supports that are available and present to us, especially living in the North. There aren't a lot of counselors or elders who are connecting with young people. And so it's difficult to know where to turn to for support. And also, as a young person, in addition to all of these things that we're experiencing and seeing on a day-to-day, we're also just trying to, go to school and play sports and be in relationships and support the family. There are things that we are just trying to do as young people. And what happens is when we're experiencing all of this and living in this world, on top of having a lack of resources and not having the coping skills to be able to deal with all of this, as a young Indigenous person, I start to internalize a lot of this, meaning everything that I'm seeing and experiencing around me, I kind of soak up like a sponge. I soak it all up inside of me. And a lot of what I'm seeing and experiencing becomes normal. It becomes normalized. I think that this is just the way that life is. And what happens when all of this negative stuff gets internalized and normalized, I start to feel a lack of positive identity. I start to feel really hopeless about, maybe this is just the way things are and maybe things can't get better. And this is when young people like myself start to feel feelings of shame, maybe hopelessness, maybe some self-esteem issues, self-doubt. And then young people turn to things like addiction, drugs and alcohol, self-harm, and suicide to deal with everything they're experiencing because they don't know what else to do. And that's exactly what I felt like growing up. So when I created this graph, for me, it was a way to make sense of my experiences. For me, it was a way to connect what I was experiencing as an Indigenous young person to this process of colonization, which is where everything stems from. Now, this whole kind of graph and everything I just talked about can ultimately be boiled down to three common norms that I see still to this day existing in a lot of Indigenous communities, including the ones that I'm still connected to, the ones that I am from. And these three norms that I see so often is a fear of talking, a fear of feeling, and a fear of trusting. Again, all things that I felt growing up as a young person. In our communities, sometimes there can be this sense of it's not okay to talk about difficult things, or it's scary to talk about difficult things, and therefore we shouldn't. There's also this fear of feeling these very real and very difficult emotions that a lot of us feel, like grief and loss and loneliness and sadness. These are all normal things that people feel. The thing that I see is a lot of people have a fear of feeling, and that's why they turn to certain things like drugs and alcohol to numb that feeling. And the fear of trusting is this third norm that I see a lot. Again, what I was talking about earlier, a fear of trusting the people around us, trusting our family, trusting support people, because we don't know if they can help us or if they can support us. And when we have a fear of trusting people, we choose not to trust people. We choose not to reach out for help and not to reach out for support. And when I came to realize that these three norms were something that I grew up with in my family, in my community, and that other people grow up with and feel in their families and in their communities, it made me think of my grandmother. Now, my grandmother Judith, grew up in a residential school. At the age of 6, my grandma was taken to St. Joseph's Residential School in Fort Resolution, where she spent 10 years of her life. From the age of 6 to the age of 16, she was disconnected from family. She wasn't allowed to speak her language. She wasn't allowed to speak Dene Suflene. And she wasn't treated very well. In fact, she was treated pretty shitty, pretty crappy, because she was raised by nuns and priests who didn't love her in the way that her family or her parents would have loved her. You see, my grandmother was born and raised on the land. She spent the first 6 years of her life only knowing Dene Suflene, growing up on fishing camps and goose camps, living with massive extended families and community members. When that was taken away from her, there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear instilled in her. And my grandmother didn't have the language to reach out for support. It also wasn't safe to reach out for support. And she was forced to keep silent about the things that she experienced in a residential school. So these three norms of fear of talking, fear of feeling, and fear of trusting started in this residential school era, when our parents and our grandparents weren't allowed to talk, feel, or trust. Now, it was only when I was out of this metaphorical house, it was only once I left the North that I was really able to unpack my experiences, meaning I was able to look back on everything that I had been through and try to make sense of it all. It was only when I left this house that I was able to begin healing, begin growing, and begin breaking cycles, changing these norms that I had come to know as true. But how do we change this reality? How do we change this environment? that I was talking about, this house. How do we change this structure of this house so that as Indigenous youth, we don't feel the need to leave in order to see that there are alternate possibilities? When I hear my people laughing, fires send sparks into the sky, illuminating the world with reminders that we refuse to be destroyed. Medicine. The answer to this question, the answer to this alternate reality, is what I like to call life promotion. Life promotion is the foundation which ensures people have the tools, resources, spaces, and opportunities needed to be able to navigate the ups and downs of life. Life promotion is creating the environment, the house, needed to be able to cultivate a sense of hope, belonging, and purpose among Indigenous young people, so that they feel, so that we feel there is something worth living. Now, I want to differentiate the difference between life promotion and suicide prevention, because I feel like a lot of the time we hear about suicide prevention, but we don't often hear about life promotion as much, or maybe we don't really understand the difference. Suicide prevention is a reaction to a specific circumstance. So when someone is in a state of crisis, we put in place these preventative measures to ensure the circumstance or state of the person is attended to. Meaning, when someone is in a state of crisis, we ensure that there are preventative measures in place so that they don't take the action of, for example, suicide. The problem with this, the problem with just suicide prevention, is that you tend to end up in a constant cycle of crisis, which is what we see in our communities. So this foundation that I talked about, this foundation of tools, resources, spaces, and opportunities aren't there in the first place. And when that foundation isn't there in the first place, we are constantly in this cycle or this state of reaction. It goes from crisis to react to the crisis, to the next crisis, to react to the crisis, to the next crisis, and so on and so on and so on. And this is what I like to call a reactive cycle. And in between crisis and reaction, there is very little time to process what's happening, to call on additional support. That, again, that foundation isn't there. That foundation is unstable, meaning it's very hard to get to a place of stability. So it is very hard to break. When you're stuck in this cycle, you lose capacity because you're constantly reacting to a state of crisis. So where prevention is reactive, life promotion is proactive. Life promotion means addressing the source of the problem before things can even get to a state of crisis. So if we're to stick with our house metaphor, suicide prevention is the fire alarm detector that tells you when a house is on fire. And suicide prevention is knowing the fire exit plan, knowing where to evacuate when there is a fire. But life promotion is fireproofing the house while it's being built and ensuring that residents of that house are aware of and have knowledge surrounding fire-safe practices. It means ensuring there's an environment that means it's not as likely that there's going to be a fire in the first place. So prevention is important. Prevention is valuable. And I don't want to say that prevention is not valuable. Suicide prevention includes things like safety planning if someone is at risk of suiciding. Safety planning means identifying the things that they can do or the people that they can turn to if they ever reach that state of crisis. Prevention also includes knowing who the crisis supports are in the community. And prevention includes restricting means to be able to fill a suicide. So if someone is thinking about suicide, creating a space where they don't actually have the means to be able to follow through with that. So that's valid, that's incredibly important, and we need prevention in our communities. But what I advocate for is doing everything we can to ensure that people do not feel that dying is a better option than living. What I advocate for is that, we all feel collectively responsible for creating a reality where people are not having suicidal thoughts in the first place, where people are living in a state of hope, purpose, and belonging. And that's what life promotion is to me. It's a state of hope, purpose, and belonging. When I started having suicidal thoughts at the age of 10, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault I was having those suicidal thoughts. I wasn't the reason I was having those thoughts. Those thoughts were a product of everything I was seeing and experiencing. Now, I will say that mental illness is very complex and that even people who seem to be living happy and fulfilling lives can still have depressive and suicidal thoughts. But what I want to center and what I want to talk about is this context that Indigenous youth find themselves in at a collective level, the macro level. Like, why are so many of us in this state? The most common thing that I hear from communities and leadership in the context of Indigenous youth suicide is that they don't know what to do. And I've been to so many meetings in so many communities, and I've heard so many community members and so many leadership members say, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to fix this issue of crisis and suicide in our communities. The issue feels too big to address. And the problem when an issue feels too big to address is that people are in a state of overwhelm, means people are feeling overwhelmed. And what happens when people are feeling overwhelmed is that nothing happens. Nothing changes because the issue feels too big to fix. And so people do nothing. And that's not good. But having interacted and spent time with thousands of Indigenous youth across Canada and even beyond, even internationally, where these same issues exist, I can tell you that the solution, although it requires lots and lots of work and effort, is actually really quite simple. This is a life promotion model. This is something that I've created in the work that I've done in meeting and connecting with Indigenous youth in so many different communities. This life promotion model is broken up into a few different areas. So youth are in the center of this life promotion model. Youth are in the center. Youth are at the center of everything. And that's how it should be. But the inner ring of this circle is the self. Everything starts with self. We need to ensure that young people have coping strategies to be able to deal with the things that they're going through. Coping strategies so that we know how to deal with difficult emotions when they arise. so that we don't have this fear of feeling, so that we know what to do when we feel sadness or anger or loss. So we need to create resources so that young people feel like they have coping strategies to be able to deal with these difficult things that are happening. Self also means acknowledging the gifts and strengths that we all carry inside of us. And I know this can be sometimes difficult to do. I know for myself, for a long time, it was really hard to acknowledge the gifts and strengths that I carried because I felt like I didn't have any gifts or any strengths, but that wasn't true. We all carry gifts and we all have strengths, whether it's being good at doing makeup or being good at hunting, or being a caring and kind person, being a supportive person, being someone who listens really well. We all have gifts and strengths, and we need to create spaces that foster or amplify the strengths and gifts that Indigenous young people already have within them. At the self level, we also have purpose, creating opportunities, creating spaces where youth feel like they have a sense of purpose or a sense of agency. And this is something that I see all too often is youth feel like they don't have the agency to make decisions or tell other people what needs to happen, because so often it's the adults or the older folks, be it teachers or support workers, who feel like they know what's best. But young people know what's best. And so we need to create a space where they feel like they have this agency or this purpose to be able to support community. Knowledge at the self level. So I shared that it was only when I started to learn about colonization and intergenerational trauma that I began my healing journey, because I don't know what I don't know. I didn't know what I was experiencing because I didn't know how colonization happened. I didn't know about my grandmother's experience in residential school. And when I started to learn about that, when I started to understand and learn about my family history, it gave me a different perspective. I could see, oh my goodness, this is why I've experienced things the way I have. But it gave me an option to choose a different path or a different reality for myself. So we need to have spaces like this for young folks to understand, processes like colonization and how it impacts our lives. Now, the second ring or the second level is family and peers. And at the family and peer level, this means love, approaching everything and everybody from a place of love. The opposite of lateral violence is lateral love. And this means in the home, amongst our friends, amongst our peers, practicing love, and especially unconditional love, loving someone for who they are as a person. And a really good example of this is like Two-Spirit young people. I grew up Two-Spirit, I grew up queer, and it meant that I feel like I could only experience love conditionally because I wasn't worth loving. And we need to change that. We need to show other people that we love them and that we care about them, and facilitate an environment where people can say, I love you to each other, and give each other hugs and be kind and caring. Because that was something that I didn't always see growing up in my family or in my school environments. Also within this family and peer level is mentorship and role models, the importance of mentorship and role models. I mentioned that growing up, it was so hard to see Indigenous people who were successful, who were living healthy and thriving lives. And as I got older, I began to realize that there were so many successful Indigenous people out there. There were so many Indigenous lawyers and actors and models and singers and people doing really cool things. And so we need to create opportunities and environments where Indigenous young people can see role models or people that they want to aspire to. Also within this level is peer support. So youth are already supporting each other. Growing up, I would go to my friends. If I went to anyone, it would be my friend to talk about the things that I was going through. And so we need to find ways to strengthen this peer support, or give young people the resources that they need to be able to support each other, because young people are already supporting each other. And a part of this is providing the tools for families to practice breaking these cycles, the tools for young people to be able to support each other in a good way, to have conversations, tools to have difficult conversations, tools to be able to ask for help. In the next ring, we have community. And at the community level, young people need access to resources. And I'll say access to different types of resources, whether it's rooted in Western mental health or Indigenous and traditional mental health, having access to elder supports, to counselors, to life coaches, to books and podcasts. A lot of my healing journey hasn't necessarily been talking to other people. A lot of my healing journey has been reading self-help books, reading books about, colonization, reading books to understand what it means to feel more comfortable talking about the things that I'm experiencing. The other one is systems of support. So ensuring that our communities have systems of support that hold Indigenous young people. I kind of imagine a system of support like a fishing net. We need to be able to create an environment where youth feel held within our communities. And so often what I see is that we have organizations and agencies and support groups in one community, but they aren't always working together. And what happens is that these support systems also tend to get siloed, meaning you'll have a youth center here, a health center here, a school here, and they're not always in dialogue or in communication with each other, meaning that youth have to go to different places for different things. And so we need to create an environment where this net is working together to hold youth up. Within this community level is also affirmation and encouragement, and this is for adults. Like, we need to affirm Indigenous young people. We need to affirm youth. We need to affirm their strengths and their gifts. We need to affirm and validate the really difficult things that a lot of people are going through. And we also need to encourage young people that they have the ability to be better and do better and change and heal and grow. And that they have the ability to, get through what it is that they're going through. And I like to call this strengths-based, approaching every interaction with a young person from a place of strength and affirmation and encouragement. Within this community level is consistency of events, adult supports. So oftentimes, you'll have a group of adults or a group of community members who maybe want to start a specific weekly event in a community. And that event will happen once, maybe twice, and not a lot of people will show up. And then what happens is those organizers give up because nobody showed up and they think this isn't making a difference. But I so believe in the power of consistency, that even if nobody shows up to your event 5 times in a row, they might show up the 6th. And that so often, as Indigenous young folks, the rug is kind of pulled out from under us, and we don't have a sense of stability or consistency in our lives. So we need to know that there's going to be a place or a space that we can always access, whether it's daily or weekly or monthly. And we know that's going to be there for us. And that means sticking with it and keep trying and keep going with something, even if it doesn't feel like it's working in the beginning. And then belonging. We need to cultivate the sense of belonging in our communities. Again, going back to the lateral violence and bullying, growing up, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I belonged because there were folks who made me feel like I didn't belong. And so thinking about how we can create an environment of belonging where everyone feels like they do in fact belong to this community and have a place in community. The next ring or the next level is the public or the national. And this level means having spaces to talk about exactly what I'm talking about now, having spaces for Indigenous youth to connect with each other, youth gatherings, youth conferences, spaces where youth voices can be heard at a larger or broader level is so, so important. Opportunity, giving youth opportunities, whether it's funding sporting events or tournaments, or scholarship opportunities for youth to travel outside of the North or to connect with other people in the North, is putting money and putting resources into opportunities for young people, especially to get out on the land, culture camps. And not just one culture camp a year, but a culture camp every month, like having those consistent opportunities available. And the third one in this public level is representation. So finding ways to bring in those Indigenous role models, whether it's virtually, bringing in things like movies and TV shows and podcasts and books. There's so much out there. And again, it took a while for me to realize how much there was out there, how much representation there was out there, that I just kind of had to look for. And so doing what we can to ensure that Indigenous youth are connected to other people who are on their healing journeys, who are being successful, who are doing really cool things. And then all of this is wrapped up in culture and land. So culture and land is the final ring there. And everything that we do, whether at the self level, family and peers level, community level, public level, is rooted in culture and land. Culture and land is inherent in and encompassing all of this. So everything we do comes back to culture and the land, whether it's those values of respect and humility and wisdom, or again, having opportunities for young people to learn their language, to reclaim language and arts and crafts. So culture and land isn't a separate thing, but it is present in everything that's being done. And with these different levels, with these different rings, all of this facilitates and fosters good mental health, a firm sense of identity, a sense of I am Indigenous, I am Dene, I am Inuk, and I am proud of who I am. That was something that I was lacking. And I'm at a place now where I can say that I'm so proud to be who I am. I'm so proud to be a Dene person. Engagement. When we have all of these things available to us, we're more likely to get engaged in community, to feel like we can make a difference, to feel like we can be a part of decision-making processes. And then life. All of this facilitates and fosters life. This feeling that I want to live, I want to be around, because young people are given these spaces and opportunities for, again, hope, purpose, and belonging. So I know this was a lot. This is a big model full of lots of different things. But if I were to summarize all of this, if I was to summarize life promotion and kind of boil it down to 3 core elements, it would really be these 3 things. 1, challenging the current norms. So I talked about those 3 norms: the fear of trusting, fear of feeling, and fear of talking. If we challenge those norms at the personal level, at the family level, at the community level, and at the public level, so much would change. just by challenging those three norms, by finding ways to feel, to trust, and to talk. The second one is amplifying positive role models. And again, I believe in this so fully. I remember being, oh geez, I don't know how old I was. I would have been in high school. And I remember I was such a fan of this show called Canada's Next Top Model. And I remember, I think it was maybe season 2 or season 3 of Canada's Next Top Model. And there was this Cree woman, this Indigenous woman who was the first ever and only Indigenous woman to be a part of Canada's Next Top Model. And I remember seeing her like on the show and just like crying and feeling so emotional because I felt the sense of connection. I was like, oh my goodness, there's an Indigenous person like on mainstream television in the show that I love. And in seeing her, I felt like that was possible for me. I felt like that was something that I could do as well, that I could aspire to. So I so believe in the power of positive role models, the power of Indigenous representation. And then the third one is that affirmation and support. So facilitating spaces and environments where young people feel seen and heard. And it's so simple of like creating and cultivating a space where young people feel seen and heard, feel like they want to be themselves, feel like they want to open up, feel like they want to explore and heal and grow because it feels safe to do so, because they feel like other people are going to have their backs. There's a story that I have to share. And in the midst of this work that I was doing with We Matter, in delivering presentations and workshops, like the one I'm doing now, it took me to northern Saskatchewan. And this might have been like 2017 or something. My brother and I went to northern Saskatchewan. And at the time in northern Saskatchewan, there was a suicide crisis. There were a lot of young folks attempting and dying by suicide. And so we went to this community in order to do some workshops around, again, suicide and trauma and talking about stuff. And at one point, when we were in one of the classrooms talking about stuff, there was a young girl who stepped out of the classroom. And so I stepped out of the classroom to follow her because I wanted to make sure she was okay. And the two of us ended up sitting down in the hallway on the ground in the school, just outside the classroom. And it was just me and her. And I was saying, you know, are you okay? Is maybe some of this triggering you? And she was feeling a little vulnerable. She was feeling like she was connecting to a lot of these things that we were talking about around trauma and suicide and feeling kind of alone. And so I asked her, you know, do you know someone named Don Burnstick? And she was like, yeah, I know who Don Burnstick is. Don Burnstick is a Native comedian who travels to so many communities across so-called Canada. And so Don Burnstick had actually been to her community multiple times before, and she had seen him and his shows in person and really like loved his comedy and thought he was so funny. And so I said, well, Don Burnstick has this We Matter video that he created where he actually offers a message of support to young people who might be going through a hard time. Would you like to watch this video with me? And she said, yes, I would like to watch this video. So we sat down, I pulled out my laptop, and we watched Don Burnstick's video together. And I'm going to show you that video right now. Just give me a sec.
Hi, I'm Don Burnstick, comedian, ex-male stripper. That didn't work out, so became a comedian. This is an important message to this whole video series for our young people. I've been going to our communities for over 30 years now, and I've seen fluctuations in suicide over the last 30 years. And I remember when I first heard of a suicide on my res. I'm from Alexander First Nation, and we were 12, and a woman shot herself with a shotgun. And me and my friends were sitting there, and we're just trying to figure out how could somebody do that, because nobody did that when we were younger. Nobody just killed themselves. It just was very rare. And over the years, through all the trauma and the peeling back the layers of our issues as a nation, as a people, family, individuals, people don't know how to deal with pain, stress, and especially in those really trying years, like when you're a teenager. Everything seems magnified. Loneliness is magnified. Breakups are magnified. Pain is magnified. And then as you get older, it should stabilize a little bit as you mature into your life. But as an adolescent, as a young person, everything gets so magnified. And for me, it happened. For me, my addictions and pain and breakups and stress and not dealing with pain, my childhood pain, I ended up on a chair with a rope around my neck. And I was going to hang myself. And I was 20 then. And I won't tell too many people that story because, I just don't. But I imagine if I would have done that, I would have just been another statistic, a cross on the ground in my res. None of this life would have happened for me. I was very grateful that I got off that chair, took the rope off, and looked at suicide and said, I'm not going to do it. I don't care how much pain I'm in. I'm not going to do it. You're not going to get me. And that's kind of what I did. In the same way, I looked at alcohol and said, I looked at it as an enemy. I had to do it with drugs. And then with suicide, I said, you're not going to get me. And I never did it again. I never attempted again. I never thought about it again. And for me, I just wanted to take this moment to share that experience that I had. And I know that what is pain, I know it's loneliness and despair. I've been there. But suicide's not an option, my friends. So I just wanted to send my love, my prayers, and we're with you. Peace.
So that's Dawn Burnstick. So I showed her that video, and she started to get really emotional. And she said, wow, Dawn Burnstick has also had experience with suicide. Like, Dawn Burnstick had suicidal thoughts and attempted. And I was like, yes, he has. And yes, so many other people have. But he overcame that. And he started this healing journey. And she's so blown away by someone that she admired and someone that she looked up to, because she couldn't believe that they had been through the same thing that she had been through in terms of having thoughts. And it was a moment where we were able to just sit, and I could feel in that moment that she didn't feel alone, that she no longer felt like she was the only person who was feeling and experiencing the things that she was. And I remember that moment so distinctly, because I remember having those moments myself growing up, these moments where I was like, wow, I'm not the only one. And I felt so much more connected to something bigger than myself. So when we challenge these norms, when we amplify and connect with relatable role models, and when we facilitate affirmation and support, what we're doing is we're creating a new reality. We're creating a new environment that is possible. Oh, there's Dawn Burnstick. And when we're creating, when we're practicing these three things, what we're doing is we're imagining an alternate house, like the one I was talking about previously, an alternate environment. And this alternate house or alternate environment is rooted in decolonization rather than colonization. It's rooted in decolonization. And this reality, this alternate reality, is possible. and it's something that we can all be a part of creating. So if you imagine this alternate house where I'm an Indigenous young person, and the structure of this house, meaning the foundation and walls and roof of the house, are made up of affirmation and support, relatable role models, and the challenging of current norms. What happens is the inside of that house, the furniture, the appliances, the chairs, everything inside of the house, those things become resilience, pride, positivity, love, truthfulness, strength, culture, language, hope, representation, unity, confidence, coping, and opportunity. And just like in the previous house, I'm a young person, I'm a sponge, I'm soaking in all of the things that I'm around me. But rather than internalizing and normalizing what existed in the other house, like addiction and violence and trauma, I'm absorbing and internalizing this. I'm internalizing love and pride and resilience and confidence. And this is the alternate reality. This is the alternate environment and house that is possible for Indigenous young people to exist in. But again, we are all a part of creating this alternate reality or creating this alternate house. Now, I will give a quick note on a pet peeve that I have when it comes to dialogue around youth engagement and change making. Now, I don't know about you, but I cannot count the number of times I have heard someone say, youth are the future. I've heard this so many times in so many spaces in community, and oftentimes it's coming from adults or it's coming from leadership, and they're saying youth are the future. Now, I'll tell you why this is a pet peeve of mine. When we say youth are the future, we're doing two things unintentionally. We're doing two things. The first is we are disassociating, meaning we are separating the future from the present. We are overlooking both youth who are struggling today to even get to tomorrow. We're overlooking the fact that youth are currently struggling to even get to tomorrow because of all of the things they're experiencing today. And we're also overlooking youth who are currently fighting and advocating for change today, because there are so many young people in our communities who are the ones who are standing up and choosing to break cycles. And we're doing that today. And oftentimes, those young people who are fighting and advocating for change today are often up against barriers that adults are a part of creating. Now, the second problem I have with the phrase youth are the future is that we are assuming the burden is for youth to carry. We're assuming that youth will be the ones to make everything better. But we're assuming this without actually building the foundation for young people to succeed or grow into the future. And you can't make effective change if, again, there's no foundation of hope, purpose, and belonging. So that's my note on youth are the future, because I hear it so many times. And a part of this is, we are not taking into consideration intergenerational trauma. And on the slide, I have also included a little graph. And you see grandparents. So for example, my grandmother, Judith, who attended residential school, again, was surrounded by all of this shame, trauma, anger, and pain. That got passed down to my mother. And then that got passed down to me. So almost like we as Indigenous young people are like carrying the weight of the previous generations before us. And this is called intergenerational trauma, the passing of traumatic or difficult events and feelings from generation to generation. So we can't assume that youth are the future. We can't talk about youth being the future if we're not helping them take away some of the weight that we're carrying from these previous generations. Now, I would like to wrap up by sharing a story. And it is a Dene creation story. And this was a story that was gifted to me by an elder in the north by the name of Bessa Blondin. And it's going to be a kind of a condensed story just for the sake of time. So I'm not going to really get into it, but I'm going to share a very brief condensed version of a Dene creation story. Now, a long time ago in Denende, in the land of the Dene people, in a time where the world was new, there were many Dene nations and Dene communities and tribes who were traveling across Denende, across the land, following the caribou herds, following, the fish. People were living and existing across the north. But during this time, when the world was new, there were these beings, these giant animals who were ravaging and rummaging across Denende, across the north. In addition to these giant animals, there were also these beings who were half human, half animal. And these beings were creating a lot of destruction across the north. They were creating a lot of chaos and destruction for the Dene people who were living in the north. But not only this, during this time when the world was new, there was a lot of Dene medicine power. There are a lot of Dene people who held powerful, powerful medicine. And there were certain people within these communities, within these tribes, who were using their medicine power for bad. They were using their medicine power for negative things. They were using their medicine power to hurt other people and to create more chaos and more destruction. And a lot of people were struggling. Communities and Dene people didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to overcome this period of chaos and destruction. And then along came a person called Acho or Yemoria, who has many different names depending on where you live in the north. But Yemoria came along. And Yemoria was a messenger between spirit world, between creator and the physical world. And Yemoria carried with him songs. He carried with him the drum. He carried with him the Dene teachings and Dene laws, the stories and traditions that people had forgotten. And Yemoria traveled from community, from tribe to tribe, and he met with all of these different groups of Dene people. And he said, I see that your people are struggling. I see that you're living in this era of chaos and destruction, and I want to help. I'm here to remind you of the teachings and the stories that our ancestors have carried since time immemorial. He brought his drum and he brought his songs, and he drummed for the people and he sang for the people and he told them stories. But he said, I will give you these songs. I will return this drum to you. I will share these teachings and stories and share with you the Dene laws. But in return, I ask one thing. I ask that you make sure that you pass on these stories and teachings and songs to the young ones, to the youth. Pass them on, share them so that those young people can be raised and carry those stories and teachings with them, and they will never be forgotten. And we'll have generations and generations of Dene people who are rooted in culture. And if this happens, if you do this, then I will get rid of the giant animal beings, and I will get rid of the half human, half animal beings, and I will get rid of the bad medicine that exists if you promise me this one thing. And the Dene people agreed. They were elated. They were like, yes, we will do this. We will carry on these stories for generations to come. Please get rid of this bad medicine this chaos that exists. And so that's what happened. However, I believe that we are in a second era of chaos and destruction. And this second era is a direct result of that colonization, of that residential school era that our ancestors or grandparents have been through. We're in a second era of chaos and destruction, a second era of bad medicine. We have a lot of people turning to violence and bullying and alcohol and drugs, and it's creating chaos and destruction in our communities. And so just like the Dene creation gave us the answers before, the Dene creation story told us that the way to rid of chaos and destruction and to get back to healthy, functioning communities is to go back to the Dene teachings and the Dene stories and our language and our songs. So our creation stories gave us the answers to the problems that we see today. Our communities remain shackled by silence and shame, and only when we choose to collectively take out the keys we already carry in our pockets and listen with open arms can we begin to heal a nation's pain. They follow in our footsteps, yet should guide every turn we take. Young ones. We need to return to the values of humility, respect, truth, love, and relationality or interconnectedness. And what relationality or interconnectedness means is that we as beings on this earth are all related. We are all the same. We are connected to each other. And not only are all people connected to each other, we as Dene or Indigenous people are also connected to the animal beings, to the plant beings, to land, to Mother Earth. We are all one spirit. And we need to reconnect and return to our spirits to rid of this chaos and destruction, to get to this house of hope, belonging, and purpose. So we all have this spirit. And I like to describe the spirit as a fire that we all carry inside of us. And our spirit, or the spirit, is the place where hope, purpose, and belonging live. Now, hope, purpose, and belonging are the foundations of life promotion, which I spent so much time talking about. Therefore, life promotion, quite simply, is the place of spirit, just like the Dene creation story said. Spirit equals life, and that is inherent in Dene teachings, that is inherent in Dene culture, and that is inherent in all Indigenous cultures across the globe. And so with that, I would like to say, Masi Cho, thank you so much for listening to me today. And I hope that we are all able to get to a place where we can reconnect with that spirit place. And I'd love to end with just one last poem. Wrap your body around your heart and feel blood memory as ancestors flow through your veins. Times are hard, but say, my love. They hold you with resilient hands that know pain. And just as they do, I believe in you. Feed gentleness to your anger. Sing belonging to your sadness. Speak words of love to your hurting heart. As they do, you, like them, are capable of facing darkness with kindness. Like northern lights, spirit dancing as heart takes time to rest. Feel blood memory flow through your veins, navigating waves with birch bark protection, getting wet without surrender. Times are hard, but say, my love, I believe in you. Masi Cho, thank you so much for listening, for being here with me today. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Alyssa, and we'll have a few minutes for questions or comments, and to have a bit of a discussion if anybody would like to do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm also with 2 screens, so. But yeah, does anyone have a question or a comment? Folks in person, just let the WAYC staff know. Or anyone here who would like to go off virtually and just ask vocally. We have a few more minutes here. Yeah.
You know, that was a lot, so that is okay if no one has anything. Lots to process.
Okay. Yeah. Just because we had a little.
Yeah, no. I think when I think to what other things were talked about this week, we had a very powerful youth panel of local youth who were 17, 18, and then JC who is in their mid-20s. And yeah, the comments and reflections just on the asks of youth, or the youth is the future comment, I think I relate to so much. And I think our team does. I know those young youth were even echoing that to leadership because it was a reverse town hall. But yeah, no, I guess it's a comment of just like, I think about that a lot, but you articulated it so well. And yeah, it's very relatable. JC has put in the question, what does healing actually look like, and what happens when you start healing?
Good question. Yeah, Musty, thank you for that question. I think that healing looks different for everybody. And that's what's very special or powerful about it. And so I guess what I can do is I can share like my own personal experience of healing and what that's looked like for me. Healing's hard, y'all. Like healing's tough. Like healing is not easy. And how I like to like think of healing is that we all grow into ourselves with specific ideas, patterns, habits, and behaviors. And these things are so normal to us because it's often all that we've ever known. And so healing is being able to look at our experiences, thoughts, patterns, ideas, behaviors, and come to understand for ourselves what doesn't serve us, what is not creating a life that feels joyful. What is causing us grief and hurt and pain. And so it means having to look at those it's having to look at those ideas, thoughts, behaviors, patterns that we all have and saying, this is all I've ever known, but I'm going to make the decision, I'm going to make the choice to change or grow, because this behavior that I've carried for so long no longer serves me. And so a personal example for myself is shame and anger are two things that were very normal to me growing up. I grew up feeling a lot of shame and a lot of anger because that's what I was taught. And that was normal. And it's so hard to think beyond, what we know. And so I got to a point where I learned about, again, this process of colonization. So I will say my healing started in learning about the process of colonization and learning about the residential school era that my family had went through, and realizing why I carried shame and anger in my life, why those things were so normal to me. And so first it was understanding why I felt and carried certain things, and then making a decision to say shame and anger is something that I no longer want to carry in my life because it's heavy and it's not mine to carry, and it's exhausting being angry all the time. And so then I had to find the people or resources or supports I could in order to be able to remove myself from the anger and shame that I was carrying. And again, it's not easy. And so I think that's how I would describe healing is firstly, it's a recognition, an acknowledgement of things that you've been through, things that your family have been through. Again, ideas, beliefs, patterns, habits that you have. And then step two, after that recognition or awareness, is making a choice around what feels best for you. Whether you want to let go of anger or shame, for example. And then the third step, after making that choice, is identifying the people, resources, and supports that you need in order to be able to change that behavior, pattern, idea, or to break that cycle. And then I guess there would be a fourth step, which is like the maintenance step, is like, how do I continue to live a life that is rooted in love and kindness, as opposed to shame and anger. And then finding the things that help me be able to live in a way that is rooted in kindness and love rather than shame and anger. And I will say also that healing is not linear, that we don't like make a choice to heal and then it's like done and we're good. I still fall back into old patterns and thoughts and ideas and behaviors, because again, that's all I had ever known for such a long time. But it starts with that awareness of there's something that needs to change in my life. And then I will say also that healing for myself also looked a lot like returning to the land, learning about my aspects of my Dene identity, recognizing that I had a spirit and that, Mother Earth had a spirit, and that I wasn't alone, that I was connected to land, I was connected to Denende, I was connected to the trees that I grew up beside and the water that I grew up along, that we were one and the same. And that helped me realize that I was not alone on my journey, that I was connected to land, I was connected to ancestors, and that I carry this like Dene power inside of me. And I just needed to find a way to bring out that power. So that was a very kind of long spiel about healing, but that's what it's looked like to me. I think there was another question. It says, any last key messages to the high school class in the room? Yeah, I mean, I have a lot. I could talk forever. I think a last message that I would give to you folks in the room is that, and I guess this stems from, again, my own experience growing up in the North, is there's so much more than what you know. There's so much more out in the world than what you see day to day. And that was something I think I wish someone had told me. I wish someone had said, there is so much more out there for you, that you are capable of going beyond. And I don't mean leaving the community. My journey involved leaving the North in order to heal. But what I wish for is that Northern young people don't have to leave the North to heal. That instead young people can turn to the North, can turn to the land in order to heal, so that they don't have to leave their communities and your communities. So I guess I want to say is there's more than what you see in the day-to-day, and to just know that you are capable of healing, because that was something I didn't feel for a long time. You're capable of healing, you're capable of change, you're capable of breaking cycles. And even in the moments where it feels like you are the only one in the world feeling and experiencing what you are, that you are not. that you are not alone.
Yes, you are not alone, and you do not have to leave your community or the North, and you shouldn't have to. All the time, play with that, sharing with other people. Well, yeah, thank you so much, Tanchai, for making time in your day and for speaking to these young people here. And this has been recorded, so this is something we can share with other youth in classrooms. A lot of kids were in school, so we're happy to bring this back into some of the Delta classrooms here. But yeah, you can join us. They're just going to do a quick closing. It's totally your call. We have Charlotte Greenland, who is the support person and also a counselor from our region. And she's just going to make some closing remarks because we're finished our event. Yay! So I'm going to, yeah, she's going to come on, I think, the one in person here.
Enjoyed your chat there, and I've admired the We Matter campaign for many years. A big round of applause for everyone here for WAYC and the amazing job that they did. Masi Cho, Cleonani, Alyssa, Holly, JC, Bobby, Rose. On behalf of Gwich'in Council International, I just wanted to say a big thank you to, of course, WAYC again, GNWT, the GTC, and the IRC for being a big part of this past week. The stories that were shared from our youth were very thought-provoking, and I really appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to the conversations that are gonna grow from this. Thank you to the grade H class from East 3 Secondary for being here. We're gonna chat a little bit more once we're offline here. But I don't know what more to say other than Masi, hi, and Kuyanani. It was a really heartwarming week, and I'm so glad to have been a part of it. Yeah, that's a wrap.
Yay! Well, thank you so much, Charlotte, for being there in person. And to my WAYC team, couldn't do this without you. You're there in person. I'm here remote. I wish I could be there in person. But yeah, thank you so much for your hard work and dedication. And thank you to Devlin and anyone connected to with the Gwich'in Council International for allowing us to do this and encouraging us to do this for them. Devlin, would you like to say anything else before we check off?
I think that my mic is now going to be a weird thing, but can you hear me? No, probably can't hear. Okay. Can you hear now? Okay. Yeah, I'll just echo the huge thank you to WAYC, to all of the panelists, and most especially the youth who really shared with such honesty and truth and supported each other through all and lifted each other up through all of the comments that came through. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conversations and the paint night. If you're in Inuvik, the paint night that's happening this evening.
Yay, we have one spot left. Someone gotta take it. All right, everybody, Masi Cho, Kuyanani, have a good day. Do something good for you tonight. Paint or go for a walk. Eat some good food. Thank you.
Merci.
Masi Tanchai, take care.